Trey, the U.S. oil and gas industry appears to be heading into a period of structural decline. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so in terms of numbers, what we're seeing is that over the last 10 years, the oil and gas industry, its employment levels have dropped from 1.25 million to about 1 million, or 250,000 jobs have been lost to the system over the last decade. That's been a trend that we've been seeing over time where each of the peaks for employment that tend to occur with the peaks in prices have started to be lower. Why we're seeing that is basically that the industry itself it doesn't have as much impact on the economy as it used to because it's a more mature industry and it's not creating the growth that it used to.
Yeah, I think that's a point that needs to be emphasized is that the oil and gas industry is acting very much like other industries historically that have risen to compete with the dominant industry, won the competition, so they become the dominant industry for a period of time, sometimes decades, and then eventually a new competitor arises, in this case electrification, and then we see decline, and the industry responds by adopting new technologies and all sorts of ways. But seeing the number of workers decline falls, so on and so forth. This is almost like a classic a case study of the rise, dominance, and fall of an industry.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I mean, well, it's not the case globally with coal as far as how it's lost its dominance in generating electricity. For the United States, it's definitely the case of what you've seen over the past 20 years. There aren't, new coal-fired plants being built and to power electricity. And so what you've seen is the demand for coal in the United States has dropped considerably and employment with it. So that's the most mature of the industries in fossil fuel that we've seen that have already experienced a huge decline over the last 20 years or so. But you could say that that's a good analog for what is actually going to be happening over the next, 20 to 50 years with oil and gas. And that's that their structure as a mature structure, they're trying to find some efficiencies and they have on the labor side of it. But overall, the cost structure for creating oil is only going up. The break evens continue to rise. And as they do, they won't be able to compete with other energy sources to create electricity.
That's a
And we're
really
talking about
that's a really interesting point because I did a video earlier this year about how the super majors, so we're talking about Chevron, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, are quietly getting rid of their high cost fields and moving into low cost fields in places like Guyana, where their break even is $30 a barrel. And so the point that was made by the Reuters columnist that sort of introduced me to this idea is that super majors are looking ahead and planning for managed decline. And the first thing you have to do is when you peak oil demand comes and then begins to and demand declines, prices fall. And so you have to have low cost oil in order to compete in a declining market. And the Permian Basin in particular, but shale generally, is not low cost. I mean, it has, what are the break evens for shale?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's somewhere around 60 to $65, just depending on where you're actually drilling. Some places even more than that. Um, what's unique about Guyana is it's a new field as far as it's a green shoot as far as where they're drilling, and so they found this massive reservoir that they're drilling into. So it's a function of math that it's so cheap because you're talking about the divisor being billions of barrels, and so that's for the cost to develop it. So the cost to develop it's not changing. It's that it's so many barrels that are there that they're going to be extracting that they can say the cost is that low. So it's just a mathematical way of looking at it there. So it's still a high cost whenever it's offshore to get oil and get it produced into the marketplace. But in their case, it's just so much oil, it overwhelms the numbers.
Yeah, it's a case of scale.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you do it at that scale. One of I actually spent a couple of years in Texas working in the oil patch yeah, out of Midland. And so I got to know a lot of those little towns pretty well, like Big Spring and like that. And they're very, very dependent on the oil industry. They get service workers and the suppliers and so on. What has been the effect of the decline in employment on those little towns?
Yeah, so funny you mentioned that. One time early in my career, we had a county commissioner come to us wanting forecasts because he says for his small area because he knew that he called it pizzas and hotel rooms the changes in the the amount of pizzas being ordered and number of hotel rooms being booked an indicator just as well as the price of how things were going for his region. But getting to that all as the oil and gas industry becomes less and less a part of generating economic benefit for the whole society, what we're seeing is that those smaller regions, I mean, not, I mean, rural regions, but where the number of jobs is disproportionately favoring oil and gas, those areas are underperforming economically versus the rest of the United States. And that was actually a paper put out recently by the Dallas Federal Reserve pointing that out that their concern, well, they said that employment growth had been slower since 2014 in oil and gas regions, and wages had been lesser in oil and gas regions, the growth thereof. So, the two things you kind of mainly point to for an economy are slowing down for oil and gas regions. And also, they were very concerned about the banking structure in those regions for oil and gas regions. They were concerned that sustained low prices would really make those banks suffer because they were already seeing that those banks were underperforming even without the low prices relative to the other regions.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because when you go out into those towns and small cities, what you find is a lot of local companies who are in the service industry. They might be supplying fracking sand or fracking services or the vacuum services, or they might have be a small drilling company or whatever it is. But there are companies there, and then there are service workers there. And very often, because those are smaller companies, they don't have the scale to compete at the lower prices. They're the first victims of this kind of a downturn. Yeah, and then there are multiplier effects backward into the banking system, the local banks who have lent them money, and that sort of thing. And it can be really devastating for those small economies.
Yeah, I mean, and you could go back to just the boom and the bust in East Texas that happened, what was that, like about 70 years ago, 80 years ago. And there's all these little ghost towns that dot 59 from the past boom and bust of natural gas. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can definitely see the historical ramifications, and it looks like we're going to go through another one of those periods.
One of the things that struck me in your report was the number of workers required to produce a barrel of oil. Then now we're back into the data and what it says, and that just in the past decade, that's fallen by half. Maybe you could explain that.
Sure. So again, what we're seeing is that the oil and gas industry itself is drilling larger and larger wells, and with those wells, they're exposing the well bore to more surface area is touching the reservoir of oil, and so they're draining these fields faster, so they're getting more production per well, and that ultimately means that they're using less people to complete the process. So what you've seen is like it's been a steady around. 53 people in it to develop 1,000 barrels of oil in the U.S. And now or oil equivalent, excuse me. And now that number has dropped to 27. So, like you're saying, it's almost halved how many people it takes to develop a barrel of oil, and that's totally a result of the innovation of hydraulic fracturing, the longer laterals, the horizontal drilling, if you will. Back in 2014, most of the wells that they were drilling horizontally were somewhere between 5,000 to 7,000 feet or spread out. So, about what's that? About 2,000 kilometers. Now, what you're seeing is those wells are being drilled out to 15,000 feet, even 20,000 feet now. So much longer laterals on these wells is what we're seeing. And again, that just leads to a lesser need for people because the number of people that are drilling the well hasn't really changed that much over time per a single well. They're just drilling bigger wells and drilling fewer of them in a year. So they're needing fewer people. And that ripples its way out across the economy.
Well, Trey, this is the episode one of a multi-part series, and we're going to be talking about technology change in the industry next. So, a good segue into the next interview. So, thank you very much for this.
Oh, thank you.